This is a brief introduction to Operation Mockingbird, the CIA, and the media. And this is William Casey, CIA Director under President Ronald Reagan's first term of office. From the first staff meeting in 1981, Casey said, "We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false." This is CIA Director William Colby. He led the CIA from 1973 to 1976, and he acknowledged the Central Intelligence Agency owns everyone of any significance in the major media. So how did Operation Mockingbird come about, and how did it get such a strong hold on the press in the United States? The CIA is the Central Intelligence Agency, and the CIA grew out of an organization called the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, that was used to spy behind enemy lines during World War II. After World War II was over, some of the men from the OSS pressured President Harry Truman to create an intelligence agency to gather information on foreign countries around the world. In 1948, a man by the name of Frank Wisner was appointed director of an agency within the Central Intelligence Agency, and that agency was called the Office of Special Projects. It was eventually renamed as the Office of Policy Coordination, or OPC. Wisner was told to create an organization that would be able to help keep track of foreign enemies, especially those that might support communism. And Wisner was told to create an organization that would concentrate on propaganda, economic warfare, preventive direct action, including sabotage and anti-sabotage, demolition and evacuation measures, subversion against hostile states, including assistance to underground resistance groups, and support of indigenous anti-communist elements in threatened countries of the free world. In 1948, Wisner created Operation Mockingbird, which was a program to influence the domestic American media. The goal of Operation Mockingbird was not only to influence the media, but to infiltrate it. Wisner recruited a man named Philip Graham to run the project. Graham worked for the Washington Post and also worked for the military intelligence during World War II, and he recruited others to work for the project that had similar experience. By the early 1950s, Wisner owned respected members of the following communication outlets: New York Times, Newsweek, and CBS. By 1953, Operation Mockingbird was overseen by this man, who was director of the Central Intelligence Agency at that time, Allen Dulles. By this time, the operation had a major influence over 25 newspapers and wire agencies, and within the CIA, the Office of Policy Coordination, or OPC, was funded with money taken from the Marshall Plan, which was the plan for rebuilding Europe after World War II and funded by the U.S. And the OPC continually looked for new ways to influence the American public. The primary fear was that communism would spread throughout the world. So some of the money was used to bribe journalists and publishers to convince the American public of the dangers of communism. According to writer Alex Constantine, who wrote a book called Mockingbird, The Subversion of the Free Press by the CIA, by the 1950s, some 3,000 salaried and contract CIA employees were eventually engaged in propaganda efforts. The founder of Operation Mockingbird, Frank Wisner, was able to recruit newspapers and restrict them from reporting about certain events. An example of this was the CIA's role in overthrowing the governments of Iran and Guatemala in the 1950s. This man, Thomas Braden, oversaw an organization called International Organizations Division, or OD. He is quoted as saying this about his role in Operation Mockingbird: "If the director of the CIA wanted to extend a present, say, to someone in Europe, a Labor Party leader, suppose he just thought, this man can use $50,000, he's working well and doing a good job, he could hand it to him and never have to account to anybody. There was simply no limit to the money it could spend, and no limit to the people it could hire, and no limit to the activities it could decide were necessary to conduct the war, the secret war. It was a multinational. Maybe it was one of the first times journalists were a target, labor unions a particular target. That was one of the activities in which the communists spent the most money. In May 1967, Thomas Braden published an article with the title, "I'm Glad the CIA is Immoral," and this was published in the Saturday Evening Post. He defended the activities of the International Organizations Division unit of the CIA. Braden said that the activities of the CIA had to be kept secret from Congress. The term conspiracy theory was coined by CIA media assets in order to discourage people from looking into the facts of the Kennedy assassination. The Warren Commission, headed by CIA Director Allen Dulles, who had been fired by Kennedy, contained many discrepancies. Kennedy had threatened before his assassination to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it into the wind. Time magazine had a close relationship with the CIA, going all the way back to the friendship between CIA Chief Allen Dulles and the magazine's publisher, Henry Luce. When former newsman Richard Helms became the director of Central Intelligence in 1966, he began to cultivate the press, prompting journalists to draw conclusions in their articles that would paint a positive image of the agency. Time correspondent Hugh Sidney recalls, "With Richard Helms, we had a setup. When the magazine was doing something on the CIA, we went to them and put it before them. We were never misled." In 1972, the CIA tried to interfere with the publication of a book called The Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia by Professor Alfred W. McCoy. Alfred W. McCoy is currently still a professor of history at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and he has written many, many books on U.S. foreign policy, and this book, which I have read, The Politics of Heroin, is considered pretty much the Bible on the whole collaboration between the CIA and the drug trade that has been going on in the world for a very, very long time, and I'll probably be doing a separate video on that. This book the CIA tried to suppress this book because it discussed the CIA's dealings with drug trafficking in Southeast Asia, and of course, going all the way back to the CIA's drug trade in the Golden Triangle during the Vietnam War, whereby the CIA was complicit in the drug smuggling that was going on there, the heroin trade that was going on, and that's a topic for another video. But the CIA was very embarrassed by the revelations in this book because, of course, it showed that the CIA was facilitating the running of drugs out of the Golden Triangle during the Vietnam War, and, of course, using the proceeds from that drug trade to fund its private, secret, covert operations. In 1972, U.S. Air Force Colonel and Pentagon CIA liaison Fletcher Prouty wrote a book about his firsthand knowledge about CIA black covert operations. And this book was called The Secret Team, the CIA and its allies in control of the United States and the world. And I have also read this book, and we'll talk about this more in a future video. But the CIA did try to kill this book as well, both in the United States and in the world. According to Colonel Prouty, it was removed from the Library of Congress and from college libraries as letters I received stated all too frequently. I was a writer whose book had been canceled by a major publisher, Prentice Hall, and a major paperback publisher, Ballantine Books, under the persuasive hand of the CIA. Operation Gladio was a program that organized collaboration between Western spy agencies, including the CIA and NATO after World War II. The object was to use coordinated terrorist shootings and bombings of civilians throughout Europe. Blame them on the communists. This program took place from the 1960s through the 1980s and the story of it has been effectively expunged from major mainstream news outlets. Except for a BBC documentary, no network or cable news broadcast has ever discussed this state-sponsored terror organization. The New York Times downplayed U.S. involvement in 1990 when the Italian Prime Minister publicly admitted Italy's participation in the program. Former CIA Director William Colby revealed in his memoirs that covert paramilitaries were used by the CIA, including the smallest possible coterie of the most reliable people in Washington and NATO. And this book is also a very interesting book that was written about Operation Gladio. It's called The Unholy Alliance Between the Vatican, the CIA, and the Mafia. In 1975, the U.S. Congress began an investigation into government operations with respect to intelligence activities. Senator Frank Church headed a committee in the Senate, and Congressman Otis Pike headed one in the House of Representatives. And during the Pike committee hearings, Congressman Otis Pike asked Director of Central Intelligence Agency William Colby, "Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?" Colby responded, "This, I think, gets into the kind of details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session." So, in other words, he did not want to talk about them on camera and in the public record. And so, clearly, there was something there that needed to be investigated by Congress. And of course, Congress did carry out an investigation of that and published a report in 1976 that you see here, hearings before the Select Committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities. And this was published. And according to this report that was published in 1976, the CIA currently manages and maintains a network of several hundred foreign individuals around the world who provide intelligence for the CIA and at times attempt to influence opinion through the use of covert propaganda. These individuals provide the CIA with direct access to a large number of newspapers and periodicals, scores of press services and news agencies, radio and television stations, commercial book publishers, and other foreign media outlets. Senator Church argued that the cost of misinforming the world cost American taxpayers an estimated $265 million a year. Senator Church also revealed that it was the CIA's policy to use secret handling of journalists and authors in order to get information published initially in the foreign press spread into the United States media. Church quotes from the document written by the chiefs of covert action staff on how this process worked. Get books published or distributed abroad without revealing any U.S. influence by covertly subsidizing foreign publications or booksellers. Church reports that over 1,000 books were produced, subsidized or sponsored by the CIA before the end of 1967. Eventually, all these books were sold in the American marketplace. By analyzing CIA documents, Church was able to study and identify over 50 U.S. journalists who were employed directly by the CIA. And in his examination of the issue of CIA infiltration of the U.S. media, Church concluded that in examining the CIA's past and present use of the U.S. media, the committee finds two reasons for concern. The first is the potential inherent in covert media operations for manipulating or incidentally misleading the American public. The second is the damage to the credibility and independence of a free press, which may be caused by covert relations with U.S. journalists and media organizations. In the 1970s, with the advent of the Watergate scandal, Carl Bernstein, an investigative reporter who uncovered the Watergate scandal, with reporter Bob Woodward, provided information about Operation Mockingbird in an article in Rolling Stone magazine in October 1977. Bernstein claimed that over a 25-year period, over 400 American journalists secretly carried out assignments for the CIA. He stated that some of the journalists were Pulitzer Prize-winning authors, distinguished reporters who considered themselves ambassadors without portfolio for their country. The CIA eventually admitted their manipulation of mainstream media and said it was necessary in order to change the minds of the American people. They admitted the information was distorted purposely in order to fit specific agendas. In 1973, the CIA published Family Jewels, a book which exposes all the information that had been hidden and or manipulated over the years. And this book is approximately 700 pages long, and you can read all of this with regard to declassified U.S. documents if you do a search for the CIA Family Jewels, and books have been written about it as well, such as the one that I have posted below. German journalist Udo Olfkati wrote this book called Journalists for Hire: How the CIA Buys the News, and it originally was published in German, and it was very, very difficult to get hold of a copy of this book, but it finally was translated into English and it was published, and I did manage to get a copy of it about 2 years ago and read it. And Udo Olfkati explains in the book just how journalists are manipulated, how they're paid off, how they get perks and benefits. And he came forward and talked about his role in having been part of this and how he eventually decided he was done with it and he wanted to expose it. And there are YouTube videos you can find online of Dr. Olfkati being interviewed about this book. Unfortunately, shortly after the book came out in English and was published, he met a mysterious end and is no longer with us. This is reporter Gary Webb, and Gary Webb wrote a series of articles called Dark Alliance in the San Jose Mercury News in 1998, and it chronicled the CIA's involvement with drug trafficking. In fact, Webb was just reporting what, of course, had already been well documented by scholars like Dr. Alfred McCoy and Peter Dale Scott, and the 1989 Kerry Committee report on Iran-Contra, that the CIA had long been involved in the illegal transnational drug trade. The CIA then ran a smear campaign against Webb, and on December 10, 2004, Webb died of 2 .38 caliber gunshot wounds to the head. The coroner ruled the death a suicide, but FBI Special Agent Ted Gunderson concluded that Gary Webb was murdered. So another brave journalist who came out and tried to expose the underground dealings of the CIA drug trafficking. And you can read all about that in Gary Webb's book, Dark Alliance. In 1999, the CIA established In-Q-Tel, a venture capital firm seeking to identify and invest in companies developing cutting-edge information technologies that serve United States national security interests. The firm has financial relationships with internet platforms including Google and Facebook. According to Jim Richards, an advisor to the U.S. intelligence community, and at one point, he said that at one point, IQT catered largely to the needs of the CIA. In the summer of 2014, a $600 million computing cloud developed by Amazon Web Services for the CIA began servicing all 17 federal agencies comprising the intelligence agency. I'm going to do a second part to this video that is going to talk about something called the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act. and also talk about a book written in 1928 by a man by the name of Edward Bernays called Propaganda, to wrap up this brief discussion of Operation Mockingbird. See you next time.